Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Quite a while ago, we did a video on the 5 worst spells in D&D 5e, which you can check out right up over there.
But today we're going to fix these 5 spells and discuss how you can make them work in your games.
There's a lot to discuss, so let's dive in.
So right off the bat, we have True Strike. This spell is notorious for being not a great pick at anybody's table. But we have 2 ideas on how we might fix it.
Taking a look at the spell, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to cut out the concentration requirement and change this casting time to 1 bonus action.
I think that we should also be changing the range to 60 feet here. So no concentration, 1 bonus action, 60 feet, choose your target.
And then finally, we're just going to change the wording to say, you gain advantage on your next weapon attack roll against the target. So what we have with this is a bonus action spell that you can cast to immediately grant yourself advantage on your next melee or ranged weapon attack. Note that we're using the word weapon attack here, so it's not going to work with spells anymore. You can't use this with cantrips, you can't use this with Eldritch Blast, but you can shoot somebody and you can use it with melee attacks.
The reason why we went that direction is because we thought that if we open it up to spells, this would become the most essential cantrip for all players, and maybe a little too powerful. By limiting it to weapon attacks, it's still now a really powerful cantrip, but for a specialized group of characters that bridge that gap between spell and sword. Arcane Tricksters, Eldritch Knights, these types of characters would excel with True Strike, and that's where we want it to really sing. That being said, there is an argument that this could be making it too powerful, and we could see that that's a potential here. So we've also thought of option number 2.
We've seen this suggestion a lot in discussions based on the new playtest rules for 1D&D, in which the guidance spell was changed into a reaction. And we think that this would be a really cool thing, and a lot of other people that we've spoken to online think it would be a really cool way to fix True Strike. Make it a reaction, but make it apply 1d4 to an attack roll, potentially turning it from a miss into a hit.
We would still make the range 60 feet, and we would still drop the concentration requirement. Obviously now it's instantaneous and a reaction, but I think that that really puts it into the category of these beautiful reaction spells, and in this case a reaction cantrip, that you can use to amplify or change a situation at the table. I think it makes True Strike really useful, and if you're worried about option number 1 being too powerful, option number 2 I think hits the right marks here.
There are so many things in 5e that are competing for characters' bonus actions, whether it's crossbow experts, polearm masters, or paladin smite spells, and a lot of other spells, other features, and other abilities. And with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, there was already the option for rogues to take steady aim with their cunning action, which granted them advantage at will on their ranged attack rolls so long as they didn't move. So this is taking it a little bit further in power level than this. It's removing the requirement that you don't have to move anymore, but it is also making it a bonus action spell. Interestingly enough, by also making the spell casting a bonus action, you can't combine it with leveled spells because the rules surrounding bonus action spells. So potentially you could let it work for cantrips, but I think it's probably safer to not.
I think that if you have a warlock who takes True Strike, uses a bonus action, then Eldritch Blasts with advantage, you would only get advantage on 1 Eldritch Blast.
Yes.
But it actually works better, not even with Eldritch Blast, but with something like Firebolt, where the way that it scales is it does extra dice of damage. Now getting advantage on that attack could be delivering boatloads of extra damage. So I do see that there's a bit of danger there. I think that we want this spell to be for the Eldritch Knight, the Arcane Trickster, who are using their bonus action to cast a spell to make their attack land.
So another spell that Kelly and I absolutely think is terrible is Witch Bolt. And we've gotten into a lot of arguments about people defending the spell, and we're just going to give our solution for how we would make it a spell that we would actually take and use in our games.
First of all, my least favorite thing about the spell is that if somebody leaves your range, the spell ends. And it only has a range of 30 feet, which in a lot of environments is a problem. So I say we just up the range to 60 feet. That gives us a way wider area to be able to impact people with the spell. And if we're going to try to maintain concentration on the spell and dish it out, I want a bigger area to hit.
Also, one of the biggest pitfalls with Witch Bolt that many people don't realize is that when you upcast Witch Bolt, the damage of the spell on subsequent turns still remains 1d12. It doesn't scale up. I'd axe this entirely. Let's let that scale up. If it's a little bit too powerful to have that d12 damage scaling, which I personally don't think it is. I could see reducing the overall damage of the spell to a d10, but I personally don't think that's necessary. The other thing that I would like to do to fix Witch Bolt is just not have the spell end if the target dies or moves out of range, or if you miss with the original attack to begin with. Just let the character that on the turn that you cast the spell, or on subsequent turns, you can retarget Witch Bolt to another target as your action.
So now you're concentrating on the spell. It doesn't mean that you're delivering the spell every turn, but as long as you're concentrating on it, you can create that Witch Bolt arc between you and an enemy. If that enemy dies, maintaining your concentration, you can move to another target and continue to Witch Bolt them. This means that the only thing that's going to end this spell is if your concentration breaks, you're knocked unconscious, or really anything that causes concentration to go away. But besides that, you can keep concentrating on the spell and blasting people with your force powers.
And again, you still have to use your action to do this, keeping it within the bounds of the power for a first level spell, even when you are upcasting it.
But now I think that we move Witch Bolt from a spell that doesn't scale up very well and is hard to use even at earlier levels to something that if you take it at first level, you may want to keep it for the entirety of the game. It might be your go-to spell, and that's what we want Witch Bolt to be. The next spell that we have is one that is actually quite hard to fix, and that is Find Traps. Find Traps is virtually useless as it's presented in the book, and most characters can get away with doing a better job without using a spell slot. So how do we fix this one?
The other problem with fixing Find Traps is that we don't want to make it so powerful that it makes a nightmare for DMs and makes it basically impossible for them to surprise players with traps, and makes every other method of finding traps utterly and completely useless. This is only a second level spell, and so it should have a reasonable level of power.
So first of all, we're actually going to do something interesting here, and instead of keeping the range at 120 feet, we're going to reduce the range to 60 feet. But that's going to help out with the fact that we're empowering a lot of the other options in this spell, so making it a lower range just means it's more impactful immediately around you.
What we're going to make Find Traps do is it's going to pinpoint the location of any trap trigger in range. This means that if you want to be completely methodical and cast the spell in every single room of the dungeon as you move through it, you are going to be burning through all your spell slots time and time again, but you're going to know exactly what in the environment is going to trigger a trap. What the spell's not going to tell you, though, is what those traps do. So this means that when you cast Find Traps, it's going to tell you, hey, that floor tile is trapped. But it's not going to tell you if stepping on that floor trap is going to open a pit that is going to drop you into a pool of acid, or if stepping on that floor trap is going to drop a 2,000-pound stone block onto your head. That's still going to be up to you to figure out exactly what the trap does, and it's going to be up to you to figure out how to disarm or bypass the trap. But it is going to tell you what in the environment is going to cause something that might kill or hurt you.
And I think that that's still valuable. There's a lot of times where you and your party are adventuring through a dungeon, you come to a door, and everybody's like, I don't trust this door. Now you could blow a second level spell slot to determine if the door is trapped. And if the door is not trapped, maybe the tile in front of the door is. Either way, you're going to learn that information, and you can say, yeah, this door is definitely trapped, which now lets the rogue jump in there with their tools to disarm the trap, knowing that it's there. We also think that this should work on magical traps, so it will tell you if an object is influenced by a glyph of warding, but it won't tell you specifically what that glyph of warding is going to do. But you can discern when magical traps are going to be involved as well. This spell isn't going to let you see through walls, so the trigger does still need to be within your line of sight, but this still feels a lot better than before, where it was asking if the trap was in your line of sight. And most triggers are going to be something that the players will be able to interact with, like a doorknob, a floor tile, a switch, a lever, something of that sort. This will give you the information on whether those objects are trapped. The two questions that we have are, should this spell grant advantage to disarming the trap? That's something that we were playing around with, but we didn't know if that made it too powerful. Also, should it apply to natural hazards? Find Traps as it stands doesn't, and there's a lot of natural hazard traps in dungeons. So if it's not necessarily a floor tile trigger, but a section of the floor is going to cave in if you walk on it, is that something that this spell should be able to tell you?
By the same token, should the trap work if the trap trigger itself is somehow invisible or imperceptible entirely? So for example, if the creator of the trap has used a spell like Nistel's Magic Aura and Invisibility or Guards and Wards or other features to actually disguise the trap and render it invisible with magic, is that going to defeat this Find Traps? One way that we could see to address that is that you have to upcast Find Traps to find magical traps of the level that you cast the spell at and below. So for example, if Guards and Wards, which is a 6th level spell, is the spell that is creating a trap, you would have to cast Find Traps at 6th level to see the things that would be revealed or concealed by that spell.
So tell us what you think about those options, but overall, I think that it's just better if it highlights trap triggers for the players.
And I think the most important thing is by making this spell require a spell slot, it doesn't entirely negate the perception skill at all, because having a good perception score, having things like alert and stuff like that, is still going to be good because that's going to save you spell slots versus using Find Traps. Whereas Find Traps, you got to prepare it, you got to cast it, you got to blow that spell slot. So it's a trade-off.
Next up, we have Crown of Madness. This is seen as sort of a dominate person light, but it generally fails where we want it to succeed the most. So we're going to make a few little changes here to make it more worthwhile casting Crown of Madness.
One of the things that we pointed out in the original video and in many of our discussions with people who commented on that video is that in most cases, casting Crown of Madness on a target is strictly worse than casting Hold Person on them. Hold Person is the same school of magic, uses the exact same wisdom saving throw. It is available to every single class that can cast Crown of Madness, can cast Hold Person, and it targets the same types of creatures with very similar effects. People have even pointed out to us, wouldn't Crown of Madness be really cool at shutting down a spellcaster by forcing them to attack? To which point I said, yeah, but Hold Person does a way better job of that, and it also lets the Barbarian automatically crit them. So we really actually have to do a lot to make Crown of Madness worth casting and more interesting. So the solution that I propose is this. When you cast Crown of Madness, and as an action on your turn while the spell remains in effect, you can choose another creature that you can see. The target then must immediately spend its reaction to use its movement to move up to the target that you chose and make a melee attack against them. The target of the spell will only move up to the creature that you chose if the way there is relatively safe. It's not going to jump through lava or swim through acid or provoke attacks of opportunity to get there. It will just not move if you do that. But it's going to use its reaction, it's going to move, and it's going to slam someone with their melee attack. Perfect to use against an ogre or a giant or someone with a big juicy melee attack.
On their turn, they still get to do whatever they want, but this brings into effect the roleplay of them going mad. On their turn, they have control over themselves and can continue to act as normal. But when it's not their turn, something else is taking control of them. But also keep in mind that this effect does charm the target. So the target, although they can act normally on their turn, still views the caster as a friend and won't attack them. They still might attack the other party members, but this protects the caster and allows them on the caster's turn to use that creature as a puppet to make melee attacks against other creatures.
The other thing that we're going to change about this spell is that rather than the wisdom saving throw being automatic at the end of every turn, we're going to take a page out of Dominate Person, and the target only gets a wisdom saving throw to shake out of the spell if they take damage. So what's really cool about Crown of Madness is that now, at the start of combat, you can use it to seize control over an enemy, use them as a damage dealer, but if your party members attack your puppet, that's going to give your puppet an opportunity to break out. So it's going to be really, really cool to use in combat encounters against a bunch of different monsters at the same time, but not really something that you're going to find useful against a solo monster or a spellcaster or anything like that. In that case, still use Hold Monster.
The last thing that we're going to add in here is that you can upcast Crown of Madness to target additional creatures. I love the idea of being able to target a bunch of different creatures and have them all start attacking each other. Now, what's interesting there is that if you target all the creatures and have them attack each other, they are all going to get wisdom saving throws to break out of it. But you could end up nuking all of the monsters there as they murder each other. So it could be a lot of fun. Lastly, we come to Mordenkainen's Sword. This allows you to summon a Spectral Sword, which for a 7th level spell slot didn't feel as good as just taking Spiritual Weapon and upcasting it. Spiritual Weapon, of course, isn't as readily available as Mordenkainen's Sword, but there's ways that we can improve on Mordenkainen's Sword, and that's to make it more like Spiritual Weapon.
And our solution to that? It doesn't require concentration anymore, And to add some extra spice, it gets to attack twice every time you command it to attack.
That's all the changes that I think we need to make. Yes, this does make it an improved spiritual weapon, but it's a 7th level spell, and it should be, and it should feel like that. Summoning Spectral Sword is really cool, being able to smash your enemies twice, using your bonus action after summoning the sword is just really cool. Let the wizard have a giant floating sword out on the battlefield while they're still casting spells. I don't see any problem here. 7th level spell, let's go for it.
I'm also a really big fan of the idea that basically high level 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th level spells can duplicate effects of 1st through 5th level spells, but without concentration. That jump up in spell slots is kind of worth it, in my opinion. And that really makes the spell much more potent. Of course, it has to do enough damage to be worth doing, because 7th level spells are super, super powerful. And so I do think you would need to still let the sword attack twice to make it worth it. Maybe we could still adjust the damage within that to find the exact right spot. So maybe it does more damage but only attacks once. Maybe it does less damage but attacks twice. I could see testing that to find the exact right balance, but I think that Kelly's absolutely right that the first step to fix Mordenkainen's sword is just to axe the concentration requirement entirely.
And so that's it for our top 5 worst spells. Again, we did a video on all the things we don't like about these 5 spells, and we've had a long time to think of how we would fix them. So we hope that this advice helps you if you feel like homebrewing some of these iterations of these spells into your game to make them more readily available for your players and more useful at the table. Then tell us how it's working and let us know what you would do to fix these, or what you have done to fix these spells, or if there's other spells you think that we should look at in future videos. Let us know this in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our amazing Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider becoming a supporter of us on Patreon by following the links in the description below.
And if you want to see us use much better spells in play, you can check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we have plenty more takes on the various spells of 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.